Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going back in time.
Time travel. Sign me up.
Well, kinda. We're going to be spending the day in New York City.
Ooh, NYC. But not just ANY Day.
Nope, October 23rd, 1854. And our time machine is a copy of the New York Daily Times from that very day.
Oh, wow. A newspaper. So we're getting the news as New Yorkers would have read it.
Exactly. And let me tell you, there was a lot going on. The Crimean War is raging in Europe. The gold rush is in full swing here.
Really paints a picture of a world in transition.
For sure. But there were also shipwrecks, political battles, even an account of a duel up in Canada.
It's like a snapshot of daily life mixed with these huge global events.
So, want to start with something that would still be front-page news today.
Lay it on me.
The sinking of the steamship Arctic.
Oh, wow. That's tragic.
It really was. The Times goes into all this detail about the chaos, the lack of lifeboats.
Can't even imagine.
And what's really chilling is that the Times actually received a letter from the ship.
Wait, what?
Yeah. A letter written as the Arctic was sinking. Can you imagine reading that in the paper?
Oh, that would be just gut-wrenching, knowing what happened.
Right. It just hits differently.
Yeah.
It also makes you think about maritime safety back then, or the lack of it.
What do you mean?
Well, the Times mentions the Arctic only had enough lifeboats for like half the people on board.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, regulations are pretty much non-existent back then.
A far cry from what we'd expect today.
Totally. Something like that today would trigger massive investigations, changes to the law.
For sure. But in 1854, it was almost like just another risk you took, especially at sea.
So we've gone from disaster at sea. What's next? That duel in Canada.
Well, let's stick with U.S. politics for a sec. The Times covered the upcoming Florida election. And trust me, the drama wasn't just tea at sea.
Ooh, election drama. That's always juicy.
So who are our main players in this Florida showdown?
We've got Governor Brown, who is a Whig, facing off against the Democrat, A.E. Maxwell.
Brown versus Maxwell. Sounds like a classic political battle.
It gets even better. There was this huge debate about maybe moving the state capital.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, it gives you a sense of the regional tensions, right?
Even back then, Florida was a battleground. Was this election seen as important nationally?
Absolutely. Remember, this is just a few years before the Civil War. Sectionalism was on the rise.
So a state like Florida, kind of on the edge, would have been really important.
Exactly. It wasn't just about who won in Florida, it's about what it meant for the whole country.
Makes you think about how news spreads and how people would be analyzing these local races in a much bigger context.
Right. People were hungry for information, even back then.
Well, it wasn't all political maneuvering and election news. The Times also covered the yellow fever epidemic.
Oh, right. The one tearing through Montgomery, Alabama?
It was devastating. They reported on the rising death toll, the fear.
A reminder of how different things were back then. Medically speaking, I mean.
For sure. Today, we have vaccines, antibiotics.
We have a way better understanding of how diseases spread.
But back then, it must have been terrifying, not knowing how to stop it, or even how it spread.
Right. Imagine that fear. And they had limited tools, mostly quarantines and some folk remedies.
So we've covered disaster at sea, elections, an epidemic. It sounds like a pretty intense day in 1854.
And we're just getting started. Remember, life goes on even amidst all this.
And thankfully, the Times didn't just cover the doom and gloom. They also reported on a crime story.
Oh, a crime story? Like what?
A counterfeiting ring busted in Montreal.
Counterfeiting. Wow.
2 guys, Washington and Glasgow, got red-handed. What's interesting is that the Times doesn't mention their sentencing.
Almost like it was a given back then, right?
Yeah, like of course they're going to jail.
Yeah.
But it makes you realize some things never change.
Oh, for sure. Counterfeiting, scams, they've been around forever.
Speaking of questionable characters, the Times also reported on a scandal brewing right here in New York.
Ooh, local drama. Tell me more.
The city register, Garret Dyckman, was accused of, well, they called it defalcation.
Defalcation. Sounds fancy.
Basically misusing city funds, maybe even pocketing some for himself. Big scandal.
Classic case of power and corruption, huh?
Seems like it. And the Times wasn't afraid to report on it.
That's good, though. Shows a demand for transparency.
Definitely. People wanted to know what was happening with their money. But beyond the news, the Times also ran opinion pieces.
Oh, yeah. Those can be really insightful. What did they have to say?
One piece caught my eye. It was talking about the guardianship of the order.
The order? What's that? It sounds kind of secretive.
Right. It's not super clear from the article, but it seems to be referring to some powerful group.
Maybe a political machine. Or a fraternal organization.
Maybe both. Remember, this was the Tammany Hall era. The lines between politics and, well, other things were blurry.
So this order, they might have had their hands in everything.
Possibly. It raises questions about WHO really held power in a city like New York.
And who benefited from the city's growth? And who got left behind? Big questions.
Big questions that are still relevant today, come to think of it.
Absolutely. It's amazing how these historical sources can spark those connections.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. There's a whole lot more to unpack from this single day in 1854.
I'm ready for more. So you're telling me there's even more drama packed into this one newspaper?
Oh yeah, buckle up. Remember that train accident I mentioned? The one on the Columbia Railroad?
Yeah, with Thomas Beverly, the poor guy.
The Times has this short but really sad article about it. It really highlights how dangerous early rail travel was.
Right. This is before all the safety features we take for granted now.
Exactly. Reliable brakes, standardized signals.
Yeah.
Back then, it was the Wild West of transportation.
It's easy to forget how revolutionary the railroads were, but also how risky. They were connecting the whole country.
It's true. Connecting communities, boosting the economy, but definitely came with risks. And speaking of risks, the Times also mentions a fire.
A fire? Where?
The Langdon Brass Foundry over in Brooklyn.
Oh, man. Fires back then must have been terrifying.
Think about it. Wooden buildings, crowded neighborhoods, and no modern fire department.
Yeah, a recipe for disaster. Today we have building codes, sprinkler systems.
Things we don't even think about. But the Times article, it really emphasizes the impact on the foundry workers.
Right, these weren't just statistics. Real people lost their livelihoods.
So we've got shipwrecks, elections, an epidemic, a counterfeiting ring, a scandal, a train accident, and a fire.
All in one day. Makes you wonder if they had ANY good news back then.
Well, thankfully, the Times wasn't all doom and gloom. Remember, this is a newspaper for everyone.
So they had stuff about everyday life, too.
Exactly. And even some fun stuff.
Like what? Give me some 1854 entertainment news.
Well, for the highbrow crowd, there was a rave review of the opera Il Trovatore.
Il Trovatore. Isn't that,
Their one and only.
Yeah.
Playing at the Broadway Theater. The reviewer was gushing about it.
Opera was a big deal back then, huh?
Definitely. A real social event. A chance to see and be seen.
Makes you wonder if they'd like Broadway musicals today.
Right. Maybe too much spectacle. But for something a little less highbrow, how about some acrobatics?
Oh, acrobatics. I'm in.
The Ravel brothers were performing at Niblo's Garden, famous for their stunts and comedic routines.
Never heard of him.
Well, it was their farewell performance. Guess where they were headed?
Let me guess. California.
Ding, ding, ding. The gold rush was calling. Even entertainers were getting in on the action.
Amazing how that gold rush touched everything, huh? But what about something a little more bizarre?
Oh, we've got bizarre covered. Check out this ad for P.T. Barnum's American Museum.
P.T. Barnum, now that's a name I recognize. The greatest show on earth.
Exactly. The master showman himself. His museum was basically a spectacle of oddities.
Exotic animals, strange artifacts. You name it, Barnum probably had it.
It's funny to think about. Shipwrecks, elections, Andy P.T. Barnum, all happening on the same day.
Shows you the range of human experience, right? From tragedy to pure entertainment.
It's true. And it's all captured in this one newspaper. It's like a window into another world.
Makes you wonder what they would think of our world today.
All right, we're back for the final leg of our trip back to 1854, New York City.
I feel like we've covered so much ground. Shipwrecks, epidemics, political drama, even a little bit of show business.
Right. It's amazing how much you can learn from just one day's worth of news.
It really shows you that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people.
Living their lives, facing their challenges, and finding ways to have a little fun along the way.
Exactly. And speaking of everyday life, I found one last little tidbit in the Times that I think our listeners will get a kick out of.
Yeah. What is it?
It's not a huge news story or anything, but it sparked a pretty big debate back then.
Intriguing. Lay it on me.
Get this. There was a debate raging in the Times about whether or not to hold school on Saturdays.
Wait, what? A 6-day school week?
Yep. Can you imagine?
I mean, kids these days would probably revolt.
They probably weren't too thrilled about it back then either. The Times actually presented both sides of the argument.
Oh, so it wasn't just a one-sided rant.
Nope. Some people argued that an extra day of school would lead to a more well-rounded education.
Makes sense. More time to learn.
But others felt it was just too much pressure on kids and families.
Yeah, I can see that side of it too. I mean, everyone needs a break.
It's a debate that's still relevant today in a way. We're always talking about work-life balance, the pressures of school.
It's amazing how a question from over 150 years ago can still resonate. It makes you realize that maybe we're not so different from those New Yorkers back in 1854.
Exactly. We might have different technology and different clothes, but the fundamental questions about how we live, how we work, how we raise our kids, those haven't really changed.
And that's the power of history, right? To connect us to the past and help us understand ourselves a little better.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into October 23rd, 1854, I'm curious, what surprised you the most about this journey?
That's a good question. I think what surprised me most was just how much life went on as usual, even with all this big stuff happening, the shipwrecks, the epidemics, the political drama. It's like life just kept rolling.
It's a good reminder that history is more than just the big events. It's about how people navigated their daily lives, found joy in the midst of challenges.
And that, my friends, is why we love doing these deep dives.
Right.
Because you never know what you're going to find.
And there's always more to discover. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe you'll uncover some amazing historical treasures of your own.